verdict is in, and the critics almost uniformly are saying the same thing. That either this is a fun, okay, meh, pulpy superhero origin story, and or it's one of the worst things of all time. And it's certainly one of the worst, quote, superhero stories, one of the worst MCU films, one of the worst Sony films. And that apparently is not hyperbole. So the polarization on Morbius is astonishing. So where do I stand in this very thick difference of opinion? Because it seems almost nobody's saying this is a genuinely good film. No one is saying it's a great film. No one is saying it's a flawless film. So really the debate seems to be between those who think it's okay for what it is. It's a very fine genre film. The action is okay. The performances are functional. It could have had better CGI, but beyond that, it's fine. It's nothing extraordinary. Don't feel ashamed for enjoying it. And the other side of the table is this is almost has nothing redemptive about it. It's extremely lazy. It's ripping off tons and tons of Batman Begins visual motifs, moments, even the music. It's all ripped off from Batman Begins. Even the color palette, it's really, really lazy. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't go anywhere.
Jared Leto as Michael Morbius, he was fine. At this point, I'm kind of sick of making excuses for Jared Leto. But as it stands, as the character, he was fine. I mean, for someone who's known for playing eccentric roles, Michael Morbius, the living vampire, is one of his least eccentric roles in the past few years. That's the Jared Leto world we live in. The living vampire is the normal one. But when he is Michael Morbius dealing with this thing that could have been more interesting than it actually was, a lot of the stuff in this movie is like the concept is interesting. Execution, no. But that's when it's most interesting. And then, he gets super monster face and then CGI fights and it's much more boring. Partly because this is the most edited for television, theatrically released vampire movie I think I've ever seen.
This movie is so much about telling and not showing that it really tells you the interesting parts and shows you the boring parts. That's not really the way that you want to go. Honestly, this isn't really even a Morbius movie. It's kind of a cartoon Dracula versus cartoon Dracula type thing. Nobody's really remarkable in any way or does anything interesting. It's just such a non-movie. I mean, the origin of Morbius is interesting, and I like how they set up the moral dilemma of his character, but they never go anywhere with it. It's all just a setup for the same cliched story points and fight scenes and action sequences that you've seen 100 times before.
He's trying to splice bat DNA with human DNA, make a chimera. So he does, and he tests it on himself, and he turns into the living vampire. Oh my god. Milo funds all of his research. Milo's still alive, by the way. Milo, Matt Smith, funds all of his research. Milo goes, hold on a minute, Mike. How's it going, bro? You're a bit of all right there now. What's going on? You're on your legs, son. And Morbius is like, no, mate, it's a curse. No, it's not a gift. It's a curse. Because he murders everyone. Anyway, of course, Milo goes and steals the serum, injects it into himself, becomes another vampire, and it's basically just Sony's two crap house vampires running around trying to beat each other up. That's it. It's like, I don't know, 25 minutes of that. It's such garbage. Anyway, do you want to know the most hilarious thing that I found in this movie? When Morbius is sat there in his office, in his lab, and he's like, I seem to have developed echolocation. I mean, he's recording it to himself, by the way. So he's taking notes of what he's developed himself. Not for anyone else, it's for him, right? It's research purposes. It's note-taking. I've developed a form of echolocation. Bat radar for dummies. Why the fuck are you saying that, you idiot? Who are you saying that to, mate? Because the note-taking was for you. I couldn't believe it. Anyway, that gave me a really good chuckle.
And if you're a Morbius fan, this is really not for you. It doesn't really have almost any tie to the comic book at all, except for a few details, which are there. For instance, the girlfriend who is featured apparently is in the comics. And yes, Morbius sort of had something to do with a scientific experiment. That's about it. There's almost nothing substantive here for a comic book fan or a Morbius fan, which I guess is kind of good. This is so terrible in a way that it doesn't really harm Morbius because they just took the name. He doesn't even look like Morbius, and he's not even a vampire. If you know the comics, that's the whole point. He's a very odd person who suffers from a disease. He's not really a vampire, but here he kind of is a vampire, and definitely the villain is a vampire, even though that's not really possible, but again, they don't care. So for what it is, I guess it'll be okay for that audience, but if you're expecting a great Morbius story, no. If you're expecting something faithful to the comic, no. If you're expecting even this to tie coherently with Venom or the other Spider-Man films, no. In fact, the post-credit scenes is also getting universally criticized for just being beyond baffling, illogical, incoherent, can't possibly be correct, and apparently was just reshot. Really just Michael Keaton's talking to air, so they didn't even coordinate him speaking with Jared Leto. So where are we in which universe? I don't think this clarifies. It just seems he's part of the Venomverse. Maybe? It's unclear. I guess they're setting up the Sinister Six. Can't really tell that either. It's just very, very confusing. But more is coming because they have Madam Web up next. Like it or not, we're going to see a lot of, quote, Spider-Man characters with movies, even though they don't seem to have anything to do with Spider-Man, nothing to do with the comics, and not very good stories unto themselves, but they're coming. And some will make a lot of money, and some will not. I think Morbius will not make a lot of money. It'll probably make enough to cover its own cost, but no sequel is probably coming. Thank goodness. If you enjoyed it for what it is, it'll be an interesting one-shot, generic exercise. If you didn't like it, don't worry. They're not going to do this one ever again. But they probably will do something kind of similar soon enough.